In the center of Rome, under the ring of church bells and the rustle of flags, an instant of profound quietness came over the city. Easter Sunday, St. Peter's Square was buzzing with excitement and life. Pilgrims and tourists, faithful and devout, converged as one beneath the warm spring sun. The Vatican balcony, so frequently the site of announcements and rituals, held a different feel this day. But who knew that the sermon was actually adieu? Pope Francis seemed slightly smaller than before, worn not only by years but by sacrifice. His customary smile was on his face, tender yet worn, a smile which had seen the world through some of its deadliest storms. Yet today he did not rise. In his wheelchair, spindly hands shaking, he extended them slowly in blessing, as if bestowing each soul an effort which took a toll on his very existence. And then, a sentence, brief but devastating: "Let all of us pray for peace in Gaza and Ukraine." It was not a prayer, it was all he stood for: peace, compassion, unity. In those words was a human who was naked of majesty, challenging the world to recall its humanity. Why did it ring so absolute? Maybe the more spooky question was, what did he see in us that led him to think that this was most important to convey? Those of us who stood watching felt something change. This wasn't just another group. This was a man preparing to let go. In the ensuing days, the Vatican became subdued. The Pope, who had resided in meetings and messages, retreated. Whispers circulated. Did he have an illness? Was this an orchestrated departure? But the Vatican remained mum. "He is resting after the service," they declared. Was it actually rest or rehearsal? Off-stage, his officials became increasingly circumspect. Invites were refused. Meets were kept to a minimum. The Pope was fading into obscurity, as a candle guttering through in stubborn insistence. And yet, even then, he didn't want your sympathy. No dramatic proclamations. No sobbing demanded. Is this how true leadership happens? Refusing to make everything about yourself, even in your own death? Francis had silently suffered for a long time. An old respiratory problem, secondary effects of surgery in his childhood, and sciatica that sometimes left him in plain sight of pain. These were wars he preferred to fight secretly. Even close friends were not aware of how severe it had gotten. Why didn't he share it with them? Did he not want to burden others? Or did he think suffering, like love, was a privilege reserved only for God? His health had deteriorated over the past few months, and insiders grew anxious. In February, there had been a scare with his health that foreshadowed the deterioration that lay ahead. But he persisted, meeting with leaders, providing prayers and clinging to his position, as if resignation had never been in his vocabulary. Why didn't he resign? Perhaps it wasn't being the Pope, it was remaining a servant to the end. The evening before his death was spent in subdued rituals. He asked to have his faithful priest hear his confession, a holy, personal last act. What was spoken in that room remains a secret, but one can only hope it was filled with reflection, forgiveness, and peace. A soft Argentine hymn, a childhood memory perhaps. Was he thinking of home? The Buenos Aires streets? The children he blessed on his way to seminary? He wouldn't go to the hospital. The doctors at the Vatican said otherwise. But he refused, wanting to stay where his heart had always belonged, among the people, behind the holy walls of the Vatican. He only had painkillers, no heroic measures, no life support. Just him, a nurse, 2 assistants, and silence. The nurse afterwards said, "He had a smile when he passed." Was it relief? Was it grace? The funeral, despite being attended by millions, was intensely personal. The typical pageantry of Vatican funerals was muted. No grand theatrics, no flowery eulogies. The attention was where it had always been, on humility, on love, on the people. Why did this feel like more than a goodbye? Why did it feel like a revolution? Because it was. In death, Francis departed from tradition, just as he had done in life. He taught us that the papacy is not about thrones, robes, or rituals. It's about connection. It's about listening. It's about showing up, even when it hurts. Throughout the globe, individuals came together. In his native Argentina, a day of national mourning was proclaimed. In Italy, more than 2 million lit candles maintained vigils and cried, both for the Pope, yet for what he represented, hope in a fractured world. Kids left artwork at memorials. Sunflowers were laid along with Argentine flags. One message read, "Gracias, Papa. You made me feel loved." Is that not enough for a leader? The testimonies started to circulate. Miracles, prayers answered, miraculous recoveries. Some hushed that Pope Francis was a saint, but perhaps his most profound miracle was this. In a time of division, he showed us what unity feels like. Through all his years, Francis advocated for those on the periphery, the poor, the ill, the forgotten, gave them a voice. He didn't merely preach of love, he lived it, washing the feet of prisoners and embracing the maimed. Even in old age, weak and gasping, he clung to justice, to peace. His voice, though more subdued in later years, was still that of a world attending. How many of us are willing to act when it's inconvenient, to serve when it hurts? Francis redefined what it meant to be a pope. He abandoned palatial luxuries, traveled light, and lived simply. He chose vulnerability over power, questions over condemnation, and empathy over judgment. He reminded the church and the world that holiness is not about perfection, but about presence. In his last move, he preached his greatest sermon, wordlessly, quietly, simply presence and peace. Is that not the most real form of faith? He didn't suppress his suffering, but he also didn't let it define him. There was power in his silence, power in his agony that recalled to him the pain of Christ, and in remaining, in bearing it, in smiling. He gave a lesson to us all that suffering, when endured for purpose, is something sacred. How do we approach our own misery? Is it possible that, like Francis, we may discover purpose within it? While the world continues to turn without him, the resonance of Pope Francis's last words echoes in the air. Pray for peace, the quiet call to conscience. In the hours following his funeral, a curious quiet fell on those who had followed him. Leaders, laity, skeptics too. It wasn't the quiet of absence, but of reflection. Without raising his voice, Francis had awakened something deep and intimate, a reckoning. His life was not about the exercising of authority, but about opening conscience. Now in his absence, the question lingered. Would we still see the refugee, the orphan, the prisoner as he had? Would we have the courage to be as troubled as he had been, always inclining into the trouble that justice requires? The Vatican itself is now at a turning point, not only of leadership, but of identity. Francis had pushed the church to the periphery, to ecology, to inclusion, to open conversation. The question now looming over the Sistine Chapel is not merely who will don the white cassock, but what sort of church will come out of this moment. His death wasn't the end of an era, it was a test. Can such an old institution as the church retain the radical simplicity of a man who cared more for the foot washing than the throne sitting? But perhaps the most authentic hallmark of his legacy is that it doesn't reside in the marble halls, but in kitchens, clinics, camps of refugees and confessional booths. It's in the humble teacher who won't let a faltering student slip through, in the nurse who hangs around an additional minute beside a patient's bed, in the stranger who elects compassion over criticism. These moments of quotidian grace, small, unobserved, are the reverberations of a pope who felt that holiness was not about show, but about staying present. As Rome and the world gradually look ahead with the seasons, and as winter turns to spring, one thing is for sure. Francis did not leave us in certainty, he left us with questions. And maybe that is the greatest gift, because in the asking, in the seeking, in the stumbling toward peace, we inch closer not just to each other, but to God. His last farewell was not a conclusion, but a start, a silent revolution still in motion, one heartbeat at a time. He didn't ask for remembrance, but for movement, not for admiration, but action, not for sorrow, but grace. And now the question is not about what we will remember, but what we will do. Are we ready to heed the silent, strong voice of a man who gave up everything till the very last moment?